After spending the new year at our hometown, my husband Victor drove me, who was pregnant, along with his elder sister Nina and her 2 young sons, trying to reach our home in the city before the snow became heavy. However, on the mountain road we unexpectedly encountered Tina, my husband's first love from school days. Tina was covered in blood, her lips frozen purple. After questioning, we learned that her husband had subjected her to domestic violence, and she was attempting to cross the mountain road on foot to return to her parental home in another county. Victor said the mountain road was dangerous and suggested driving her home via the main highway instead. Though it was a longer detour, it would be much safer. The problem was that the car only had 4 seats and was already over capacity. While I was still considering how to handle the situation, Victor abruptly pushed me out of the car. "Evelyn, just wait here for a little while. I'll come back right after dropping Tina at her parents' house." Seeing that he actually intended to abandon me in the snow, I panicked and clung to the car door. "Victor, taking the highway to Tina's parents' house will take more than an hour. In this freezing, snowy weather, and while I'm pregnant, leaving me in this remote place with no village ahead or behind will put me in danger." To my shock, Victor impatiently shoved me away, yanked his ex-girlfriend into the front passenger seat I had just vacated, and snapped, "Women are so dramatic. What could possibly happen to a grown adult?" "Exactly. It's just snow, you're wearing a thick down jacket, you're not going to freeze to death." His sister Nina, who had her 2 children with her, echoed his words. In the end, they ignored my desperate pleas and drove off. I tried calling his relatives and friends for help, but no one was willing to assist. By that time, the extreme cold had already triggered uterine contractions. To protect the baby, I immediately dialed 911, emergency medical services. After hanging up, I hesitated for a moment, then called the police. "I want to report a crime. I just encountered a murderer, and the murderer hijacked my car and fled." Tina had committed murder. Victor and the others may not have noticed, but I, having studied criminal psychology, deduced from numerous subtle details that she had just killed someone. By the time the ambulance arrived, I had been exposed to the blizzard for about an hour and was already hemorrhaging heavily. Although they rushed me to the hospital without delay, it was too late, the baby could not be saved. After the abortion procedure, I lay in the hospital bed, my lower abdomen cramping in waves, tears streaming down uncontrollably. Because Victor suffers from severe asthenozoospermia, I had undergone multiple rounds of IVF to conceive this child. Yet now, his life had been taken by his own father amid that raging blizzard. My parents rushed to the hospital upon hearing the news. After learning that Victor had abandoned their pregnant daughter on a mountain road for the sake of his first love, they called him in a fury. It took 5 consecutive calls before he finally answered. The moment he picked up, my mother unleashed a torrent of anger and informed him that the baby had been lost due to his stupidity and callousness. Victor sounded highly displeased on the other end. "Mom, did Evelyn put you up to this? She's already 4 months along, the doctor said the fetus is stable at 4 months. How could it just be gone? I think she's just making trouble out of nothing." Nina chimed in from the side. "Ever since she got pregnant, Evelyn has become more and more dramatic. Victor was only kindly giving a battered female classmate a ride home, yet she fabricated this story about miscarrying. When I was pregnant with my first, I fell into icy water and everything turned out fine, didn't it? In my opinion, you two shouldn't indulge her anymore. She needs her spoiled attitude corrected. She's about to become a mother, how can she still be so immature?" My parents trembled with rage, their faces livid at such shameless remarks. Satisfied with their provocation, the other side abruptly hung up. Furious, I tried calling back repeatedly, but no one answered. Having just undergone an abortion, I was extremely weak. Seeing me pale and breaking into cold sweats, my mother wiped away tears and said, "How did you ever marry such an inhuman creature? I told you before the wedding that Victor was unreliable and lacked character, but none of you listened. Well, now you regret it, don't you?" My mother's words brought back memories of the time before marriage. Back then, Victor had behaved impeccably in front of me, polite, gentle, and never flirting with other women. He had promised to cherish me for life. Yet the moment he saw his first love Tina, he cast me aside without a second thought. Had I known his heart was never truly mine, why would I have married him? At that thought, I made up my mind and said to my still fuming parents, "Mom, Dad, I've decided to divorce Victor." I was blind and failed to see his true nature before, but now I have seen exactly who he is. My father's eyes lit up instantly. He said "good" several times in a row and immediately went out to find a lawyer. My mother was equally delighted and hurried off to buy nourishing pork bone soup for my recovery. No sooner had my parents left than the police knocked on the door. "Miss Evelyn, you previously reported that a murderer hijacked your car?" "Yes, the murderer Tina took my car and fled." I was telling the truth. She did seize my car, and she had indeed committed murder. While studying criminal psychology, I once analyzed thousands of photographs of homicide offenders side by side. Tina's appearance and demeanor at that moment perfectly matched the post-homicide state I had extensively studied. Most crucially, she was covered in a large amount of blood, yet upon close observation, apart from some facial swelling, she showed no significant injuries that could account for it. I relayed all my deductions to the officers. They exchanged a glance, confirmed Tina's destination, and immediately contacted the Public Security Bureau in the county of her parental home. About 30 minutes later, the phone on my bedside table rang. When I answered, Victor's furious voice exploded through the speaker. "Evelyn, are you insane? If you're sick, go get treatment. How dare you falsely report to the police that Tina is a murderer? I was only kindly driving a domestically abused woman back to her parents. Why do you keep making these ridiculous scenes one after another? Hurry up and call the police to tell them you filed a false report out of jealousy toward Tina. Do it now, or don't force me to drive back and beat you." Seeing him spew such filth, I trembled with rage. Recalling all the despicable things he had done to me recently, my anger surged uncontrollably, and I shouted back into the phone, "Are you brain dead, Victor? Do you think filing a false police report carries no legal consequences? If I wasn't certain, why would I report it for no reason? If your brain is useless, donate it. Stop embarrassing yourself in front of me. If you can't bear to see your first love go to prison, go serve the sentence for her. Acting like you have some terminal illness, disgusting." To avoid any more of these repulsive calls, I switched off my phone. Since I was already 4 months pregnant and my physical condition had remained poor after the miscarriage, the doctor recommended that I be hospitalized for observation. On the second day of my hospitalization, the police came to take my statement. During the recording, they informed me that Tina had indeed committed homicide, but the victim was not her husband, but the mistress. After visiting relatives and returning home, she discovered her husband having an affair with the neighbor May. In a fit of rage, she grabbed the large cleaver used for cutting meat during the New Year and slashed May's neck. At that moment she was like a madwoman who had lost all reason. Her husband held her tightly and slapped her several times before pulling her back from her frenzy. Upon regaining her senses, she was terrified, threw down the cleaver and fled toward her parents' home. Since her husband was present at the scene of the killing, in order to avoid trouble and protect their child's future, he directly pushed May's body into the sweet potato cellar at home and covered it. Under normal circumstances, if they concealed it well, it would take the police some time to trace it back to them. However, after I sensed that Tina might have committed murder, I immediately reported it to the police. After the police discovered the victim's body in the sweet potato cellar at Tina's husband's house, they lawfully arrested Tina. Her husband was also imprisoned for the crime of harboring a criminal. The police stated that although Victor helped the murderer Tina escape, he was unaware of the crime and lacked criminal intent, and therefore did not commit the offense of harboring or shielding a criminal. I thought Victor, having narrowly escaped legal liability, would restrain himself. Unexpectedly, he soon called again to pick a fight. "Evelyn, you vicious woman. Has Tina ever drunk your blood or eaten your flesh? How could you collude with the police to arrest her? Was she wrong to kill the mistress after being betrayed? As a woman yourself, how can you be so malicious and lack any empathy?" He ranted and cursed irrationally on the phone. My head was splitting from listening, In order no longer hear his baseless abuse and blame, I mustered my energy and blocked his phone number and Facebook account. I stayed in the hospital for 5 days. During those 5 days, not a single member of the Sue family came to visit me. But that no longer mattered. I had already decided not to continue with Victor, so whether his family visited me or not was of little concern. What bothered me was a Facebook photo Victor's sister sent me just before I was discharged. The picture showed a large group of people staying in the marital home my parents had bought before the wedding, and among them a thin figure stood out conspicuously. It was Tina. I was utterly confused. Tina was a murderer, wasn't she? Shouldn't she be in prison right now? While I was still puzzled, an unfamiliar number called. Worried it might be something important, I answered, and it was Victor's voice. "Evelyn, my sister has come to visit our home. You're the lady of the house, why aren't you hurrying back to prepare a table of food to entertain the guests? What are you doing wandering around outside? Don't tell me you've got another man behind my back." Listening to his vulgar and offensive words, I felt this Victor was a complete stranger. In my memory, Victor had always been refined, calm, and composed. Yet ever since he saw Tina again, for some inexplicable reason, he had turned crude and contemptible. Facing the aggressive Victor on the phone, I took a deep breath and said, "Victor, you showed no concern at all about the loss of our child, and now you want me to come back serve your guests. Are they really guests? Tina is a murderer. Tell me, why is a murderer staying in our home?" Here we go again. Is this fun for you? I only abandoned you on a mountain road for a short while, and you got away safely yourself, so why do you keep using the child's life to threaten me? Yes, I cared about the child, but you cannot use his death to blackmail me. Hurry back and cook. I've never seen such a hostess. Guests are sitting there drinking plain water while you're out enjoying yourself. Can't you cook yourself? Are your hands broken? How could a grown man like me possibly cook? Victor shouted as if I had stepped on his sore spot. I sneered inwardly. Now he was putting on an act. Before marriage, who was the one always staying in the kitchen to build the image of a perfect family man? Yet in front of Tina, he was acting barbaric and unreasonable. Did Tina actually like this type? If you really think you shouldn't cook, then let Tina do it, I said sarcastically. How could Tina cook? She's pregnant. How can a pregnant woman be exposed to cooking fumes? What kind of shameless jerk is this? If she can't do it, then I can? Before we returned to the countryside for the new year, every single meal was prepared by me while I was in the early stages of pregnancy. How come when it comes to Tina, she's suddenly so delicate? But I knew I could never wake a man who was pretending to be asleep. So I dropped the subject. If worse came to worst, I simply wouldn't go back. I refused to believe they would starve without me. What concerned me more was Tina's situation, so I asked Victor again, was Tina released on bail pending trial because she is pregnant? Yes, her pregnancy meets the conditions for release on guarantee. Then why is she living in our house? You don't understand. Although she's pregnant, because her murder case implicated her husband's family hates her and would never help her obtain bail or care for her. I had no choice, so I fitted snow chains on the car and rushed back to pick her up. We've known each other since childhood. She has always called me Big Brother. When my little sister is in trouble, as her brother I must help her, right? It won't be for long, just until she gives birth and completes her postpartum recovery. Evelyn, come back quickly. My sister has her own family to look after and can't stay at our house forever. And I, a grown man, don't know how to prepare meals for a pregnant woman, so we still need you, with your experience, to take care of it. On the other end of the line, Victor's tone suddenly became ingratiating. You don't have to specially cook for her. Aren't you pregnant too? Just make a little extra when you're preparing your own maternity meals, it won't be too much trouble. Even now, he still refused to believe the baby was really gone. That wasn't what chilled me the most. What truly broke my heart was that he had brought his murderer ex-girlfriend from the village to my home, let her live in my marital bedroom, and even expected me to return to cook and care for her during her pregnancy and postpartum recovery. The audacity. Sensing my prolonged silence and clear reluctance, Victor's expression darkened instantly. "Hey, Evelyn, I'm asking you nicely, don't get too big for your boots. It's just making a bit more food when you cook for pregnant women. How is that going to kill you? Get your ass back here right now and cook, or don't make me come find you and deal with you." I was about to explode when my parents, who had gone to handle the discharge procedures, appeared at the ward door. Not wanting to upset them, I hung up immediately and asked about the lawyer. The lawyer said there's currently no solid evidence of his infidelity. If you file for divorce and he refuses, the process could drag on for quite a long time. But he abandoned me, pregnant, on a snowy mountain road for another woman, causing me to miscarry and lose the baby. Isn't that enough to grant me a quick divorce? Being married to such a disgusting person for even one more minute made me sick. My father sighed. The lawyer says lawsuits depend on evidence. There's no proof that he abandoned you in the car, and neither his sister nor Tina would ever testify against him. Therefore, even though the baby is gone, we can't prove it was caused by his malicious actions. I finally understood why marriage is easy but divorce is hard. Still unwilling to accept it, after being discharged and returning to my parents' home, I pulled out the law books I had bought in school and began searching both in those books and online for possible ways to break the deadlock. In the evening, Victor called again using his sister's phone. "Evelyn, so you're really not coming home? You want me to come over and teach you a lesson myself? Do you know who cooked today's dinner?" "My sister." "Making a guest cook, what a nerve you have." At that moment, my father called me from the living room to come eat. Victor, sharp-eared as ever, immediately heard him and sneered coldly, "So you're at your parents' place, huh? Perfect. Since you won't come to us, we'll come to you. A person needs food like steel needs forging, we can't starve a whole crowd. Evelyn, don't say I didn't warn you, if you're not back by 8 o'clock, every single one of us will show up at your parents' house for dinner. Let me make this clear, your father has heart problems. If anything happens to him because of this, it's not my responsibility." Seeing how aggressive he was, I knew I could no longer retreat, otherwise they would only push further. After hanging up, I ate dinner with my parents. Once dinner was over, I took out my phone and first sent a message to Victor's brother-in-law Jason. "The 2 children your wife gave birth to are not yours. They're at my house right now. If you don't believe me, you can take them for a paternity test." Everyone in the Sue family knew that Victor's sister had a lover outside. But because her husband Jason was a fitness trainer and physically intimidating, everyone tacitly kept silent. Had Victor's father not drunkenly let it slip while cursing her last Chinese New Year, I would still be in the dark. At the time, Victor repeatedly warned me never to mention it. Back then our relationship was good, and I knew revealing it could lead to violence, so I stayed out of it. But now they were forcing my hand, I could no longer be blamed for what happened next. After sending the message to Jason, I called the police again. "Hello, I'd like to report a crime. Tina, the murderer from Sanchi Township who was recently released on bail, is currently in my home. I was the one who originally reported her for suspected homicide. I now fear for my personal safety. Please send officers as soon as possible. My address is Unit 3, Building 705, Yushi Garden, West District, Jingdong City." After ending the emergency call, I confirmed with my parents that the home surveillance system was still functioning normally. Receiving confirmation, I sat in the living room watching TV while waiting for Victor and his gang of scum to arrive. Barely 3 minutes later, the front door was pounded furiously. "Evelyn, open the door. Not coming home during the holidays to cook and entertain guests, huh? You think you can hide? If you don't open up, get ready to feed all of us. Open the door, stop playing deaf." I saw the lights on from downstairs. The sudden banging startled my parents who were busy in the kitchen. Recognizing Victor's voice, they started toward the door, but I stopped them. "I'll open it. You two stay quiet and just watch from the side. No matter what happens, even if Victor hits me, don't interfere. Don't get too emotional. I'm gathering evidence for the divorce. You have to sacrifice a child to catch a wolf, after all. After instructing my parents, I opened the front door. The moment it swung open and Victor saw it was me, he backhanded me across the face. As my face was whipped to the side, he cursed, "You bitch. During the holidays, of all times, you just have to ruin everything, don't you? You really thought hiding at your parents' place would stop me? Victor, how dare you hit my daughter?" My father, whom I had told to stay quiet and watch, suddenly exploded with rage and began searching the house for a stick. Seeing my father like this, my eyes welled up with tears. I had been too theoretical. In this world, which parent could remain unmoved watching their child being beaten? While my father hunted for a weapon, Victor shoved me aside and marched in with his sister Nina, her 2 children, and Tina. As she passed me, Tina paused and said with a half-smile, "Sister Evelyn, I'm just staying at your place to nurture my pregnancy. Why are you so petty? There's absolutely nothing going on between Victor and me. Tina, why waste your breath explaining to a jealous shrew like her? From what I know of her, she'll never listen no matter what you say." Victor beckoned Tina to come sit beside him. I closed the front door expressionlessly. When I turned around, the living room floor my mother had cleaned spotlessly was covered in filthy shoe prints. Suppressing my anger, I walked over and frowned at Victor, who was glued to Tina's side. "Victor, isn't your only goal to make me come home with you? Fine, I'll go back with you as you wish. Can you stop this nonsense now?" "No can do, my dear." Victor, his mouth stuffed full with a whole sugared mandarin orange by Tina, spoke with juice dribbling from the corners of his lips. He glared at me venomously and said, "I have to make your parents understand clearly that the man you married is me. Otherwise, every time we argue, they'll always be tempted to take you back home." "What do you mean?" "I need to make them pay a price for trying to take you home. That way, in the future, when they think about taking you back to pressure me, they'll have to think twice." As he spoke, he provocatively kicked off his shoes and propped his feet up on the coffee table. At that moment, I spoke faintly, "Victor, the baby is gone." He instantly flew into a violent rage, leaping up and reaching across the coffee table to strike me. "Damn you. You're using the baby's life to provoke me again. You know full well how much I care about the child, and yet you still—" The rest of his words caught in his throat, because I had pulled out the hospital medical records. "How could this happen? Evelyn, this has to be fake, right? This is your way of getting revenge on me for abandoning you on that snowy mountain road, isn't it?" He looked up at me, his face filled with desperate hope. "Victor, do you not remember how this child came to be? You have severe oligospermia. I went through more than a dozen rounds of IVF before finally getting pregnant. The doctors warned us repeatedly to be careful, yet you ignored my pleas and, just to drive your murderous ex-girlfriend home, abandoned me on a mountain road in the middle of a raging blizzard. Who are you putting on this pained act for now? It's too late, the baby is gone." Victor stared at the medical records in his hand, his face twisted in agony. "I never imagined. I was just driving Tina back to her parents' house. You were wearing such a thick down jacket, how could the cold possibly have caused a miscarriage? So, these so-called medical records must be fake, right?" He looked at me expectantly, desperately trying to hear the answer he wanted from my lips. "It's real. The baby is gone, you killed it. The moment you shoved me out of the car, slapped me, and abandoned me in that blizzard, you should have considered this possibility. So stop acting like you can't accept it. This is your retribution, and it's also the consequence of my own poor judgment in marrying the wrong man. After you abandoned me, I called you, your parents, your sister. I called everyone I could think of. But no one answered. If I hadn't come to my senses and dialed 911 in time, I probably would have frozen to death on that mountain road along with the baby. I didn't do it on purpose. I just felt sorry for Tina having to walk in the snow." He instinctively tried to dodge responsibility. At that moment, his older sister Nina reached over and took the medical records. After a single glance, she declared, "Fake. I know women's minds better than anyone. Back then, to avoid marrying that brute Jason, I jumped pregnant into an icy river full of ice chunks to threaten our parents. The water was that cold, and the baby was fine. You're our Sioux family blood, how could your child be so fragile that a bit of snowy wind causes a miscarriage? Victor, don't let this vicious, scheming woman Evelyn fool you. She definitely forged these records just to manipulate you and make you regret it. The baby must still be there. As she spoke, she stepped forward to lift my clothes. Reminded by her words, Victor immediately moved forward to help. While I dodged and struggled, Tina, who had been watching the drama unfold, quietly raised her phone, ready to record my humiliation. Just then, the front door was pounded heavily once more. "Who is it?" Victor shouted irritably. "Me," came Jason's grim voice from outside, Victor's brother-in-law. The instant Jason's voice sounded, Nina, who moments ago had been egging Victor on to lift my clothes, turned ashen. In panic, she grabbed Victor's hand. "Victor, I just mentioned jumping into the icy river while pregnant to avoid marrying your brother-in-law. You don't think he heard everything from out there, do you?" Victor swallowed hard. And no. It shouldn't be. Both of them were clearly terrified. So I opened the door for them. Outside stood Jason, 192 centimeters tall, like a mountain. In his hands he carried a case of pure milk and a case of fruit. "Brother-in-law, what brings you here so late?" I asked casually while taking the New Year gifts from him. Catching my glance toward the living room surveillance camera, he played along perfectly. "Your sister hasn't come home since returning to her parents after the holidays. I heard she went to your family's place but couldn't find her there. I figured she might have come here, so I came over." As he spoke, he glanced at Nina on the living room sofa, her face filled with panic, and at the two children who had instantly turned as meek as quails. His face darkened. "Do I need to come over there and invite you all home myself?" Feeling guilty, Nina looked toward her only brother Victor. After a moment's hesitation, Victor avoided her gaze. With no choice left, Nina obediently took the two children and followed Jason out. She probably still hoped Jason hadn't heard her self-incriminating words from outside. But I knew better than anyone that the seed of doubt had already been planted in Jason's heart. Unless something unexpected happened, the coming year would likely be anything but peaceful for their family. After Nina left with the children in tow behind Jason, the only outsiders remaining in the living room were Victor and Tina. My parents moved to stand beside me. My father then took out the divorce agreement prepared by our lawyer. "Victor, when I entrusted Evelyn to you all those years ago, you swore you would cherish her for life. Yet now, for the sake of the woman beside you, you actually forced a pregnant Evelyn out of the car. It was freezing outside, how could you be so heartless? To conceive your child, Evelyn endured round after round of IVF treatment. Think of all the pain and exhaustion she suffered, only to be treated by you like this. My daughter no longer wants to be with you. Sign the papers. Otherwise, if this goes to court, it won't look good for you." Tina's previously dim eyes instantly lit up. She looked at Victor with eager anticipation. Victor, however, refused the moment he saw the property division terms. "The house is our marital home, how can it possibly all go to Evelyn?" His eyes bloodshot, his face filled with indignation. Seeing this, my father slammed the original notarized document down in front of him. "Look closely, this house was purchased entirely by us as premarital property for Evelyn. A scoundrel who abandons his wife and child, what right do you have to half of it?" Faced with the evidence my father produced, Victor let out a cold laugh. He plopped down on the sofa, gazing leisurely at my family, and snarled, "The logic is sound enough, but divorce? How can anyone get divorced without shedding a few layers of skin? If you insist on fighting me tooth and nail over every detail, fine, this marriage, I'll drag out for 10 or 20 years until your daughter becomes an old maid. Then we'll see who else would want her." "Is that so?" I snatched the property certificate from his hand and smiled coldly. "I suppose you've forgotten what my minor was in university? You want to drag this out until I'm dead? Be my guest and try. I'm no legal expert, but dealing with a rogue like you? More than enough." You still can't just bully people like this. Tina, who had been playing the weak and innocent victim all along, finally couldn't hold back any longer. Victor has been married to you for so many years. If he has no credit, he's at least put in the hard work. Moreover, you lost Victor's child, shouldn't you offer some compensation for that? I looked at Tina. Have you ever considered, if May hadn't been hacked to death by you, how you would feel if, during your own divorce from your husband, she said the same thing to you? Her face instantly turned deathly pale. I pressed her step by step. When the same thing happened to you, you grabbed a knife and tried to kill someone. But when it happened to me, you pretend to be blind and brush it off. Don't you know perfectly well how the child was lost? What about you? You called the police and got me arrested when I could have escaped punishment. Shouldn't you die for that? I only hitched a ride in Victor's car. Why did you have to ruin my life? Just as the tension reached its peak, the door was knocked again. Ms. Evelyn, we received a report that a murder suspect out on bail has come to your home to cause trouble, the police outside asked me. I let them in and said, yes, the murderer is in the living room right now. In the living room, Tina, who had been standing next to Victor, collapsed onto the sofa in terror the moment she saw the police. Victor hesitated for a second before stepping in front of the trembling woman and said stiffly, officers, isn't this a misunderstanding? Tina is still on bail. She came to my wife's parental home at my invitation. The door of Ms. Evelyn's home is not very soundproof. We heard everything the suspect said outside just now. This can be interpreted as the suspect coming to threaten the person who reported her. The lead officer stated bluntly, furthermore, the suspect's bail restriction area is Sanchi Township. By coming to Jingdong City without filing a report, she has violated the terms of her bail. We will now rearrest her in accordance with the law, and the original 10,000 yuan bail deposit will be forfeited. Only a few days after regaining her freedom, Tina was arrested again. She wailed hysterically as she was taken away, but the law is merciless. She ultimately had to pay the price for what she had done. After Tina was taken away, since Victor refused to agree to a divorce, I formally filed for divorce at the local people's court. During the mediation session before the first hearing, all of Victor's relatives, who had been unreachable whenever I needed help, showed up. They talked over one another in the mediation room, claiming Victor was young and foolish and begging me to give him one more chance no matter what. Victor's mother even sat on the floor of the mediation room, wailing dramatically, calling me a curse who had ruined her son and caused the loss of her grandson. From beginning to end, not one person cared about what really happened on that snowy day when we were driving back to the city. At the first hearing, Victor sobbed uncontrollably in court, saying he had only been momentarily blinded by lard, i.e., confused, that he still wanted to live with me, and that he did not want a divorce. Although I presented the relevant evidence, the first divorce petition ultimately failed. I did not lose heart and, after waiting 6 months, filed a second petition. At the hearing, the judge asked whether I was willing to give Victor another chance. I replied that human hearts are made of flesh, one injury leaves one scar. Victor abandoned me, a pregnant woman, on a snowy mountain road for the sake of his murderous first love, causing the child I had worked so hard to conceive through IVF to lose the chance to be born. Afterward, he showed not the slightest remorse. Not only did he fail to visit me in the hospital after my miscarriage, he unilaterally brought his bailed-out first love, who was pregnant and a murderer, into our marital home and demanded that I return to cook prenatal meals for her. When I refused, he brought people to harass my parents' home and even threatened me with my father's illness. Piece by piece, he forced me toward a dead end. What qualification does he have now to ask me for another chance? Finally, the second hearing reached a verdict. The court granted my divorce from Victor. The matrimonial home my parents had bought for me was awarded to me alone. Since we had exhausted our savings on fertility treatments during the marriage, there was little joint property to divide, the car was sold, and the proceeds were split equally. Thus, my marriage to him came to an end. I had let it go. After the divorce, I began a new life. Yet Victor refused to accept it and repeatedly came to my workplace and my home to cause disturbances. In front of many people, He claimed I had divorced him because I was having an affair, that after years of marriage he had gained neither a child nor a house, and that our savings were now in the red. He called me a modern-day Pangenlian, a notorious adulteress in Chinese literature, and cursed me to die a miserable death. Everyone who knew me understood he was lying. Yet the world is full of ignorant people who love to meddle in others' family affairs. Unable to bear the harassment, I called the police multiple times, but each case ended without resolution. Driven to desperation, I hired a lawyer and sued everyone who had been in the car that day and left me alone on the snowy mountain road. Although none of them were willing to admit it, the surveillance footage from my home and the emergency medical staff at the time could testify on my behalf. 1 month later, Victor, his sister Nina, the handcuffed Tina, and I met again in court. When Nina appeared, her face was covered in bruises. The moment she saw me, she began wailing and cursing, saying I should leave some room for mercy. Why did I have to drive her whole family to ruin? I retorted, it's your brother who leaves no way out for others. We're already divorced, yet he keeps jumping around in my life, slandering me and my family. I was originally willing to let bygones be bygones regarding your abandonment of a pregnant woman on a snowy mountain road, but you people courted death and forced me to sue. Since that's the case, let's settle the score for that snowy day once and for all. 1 month later, Victor, Nina, and Tina were all sentenced to prison for intentional injury. Before being taken away, Victor fawningly admitted he was wrong, said he did not want to go to jail, and begged me to write a letter of forgiveness. I pushed him away forcefully and, before he could lose his temper, said coldly, I already gave you chances, Victor, it was you who cut your own path short. Reform yourself well in prison, consider it atonement to the child who never had the chance to be born. For the rest of my life, I will never forgive you again, nor will I ever see you. After Victor and Nina were arrested, I ran into Jason again at the gym. Jason thanked me for telling him the truth and preventing him from raising another man's child for the rest of his life. Even now, you still don't plan to divorce Nina? I looked at him in puzzlement. You deserve a much better life. Jason replied with an icy expression, the thing I hate most in my life is betrayal and deception. Nina's family treated me like a fool, why would I ever let them off easily? I'm not a good person myself. Now that they've fallen into my hands, whether in prison or after release, Nina will have to pay the price for her lies. I did not ask what price Nina would have to pay. Because I was moving away. To avoid further unnecessary trouble, my parents and I sold the house in Jingdong City and relocated to another province. Life is short, there is no need to waste my limited time entangled with scum. In the 3rd year after moving to the new province, I met my current husband. He fell in love with me at first sight and pursued me passionately. Only after carefully observing him for 3 full years did I finally marry him. Not long after the wedding, we welcomed our own child, the fruit of our love. As my new life unfolded, the shadow cast by Victor and his family gradually faded. I believe my future will only get better and better.